to, so we're going to get going. Hello and welcome everybody to today's webinar, the post-pandemic outlook for U.S. construction, the facts, perspectives, and solutions. My name is Nick Cray. I'm a construction solution specialist here at USCAD, and I'll be the moderator for our panel today. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. The webinar is scheduled to last 1 hour with time for Q&A. Participant audio and video is disabled. Please post questions in the Q&A function at any time, which can be found in the GoToWebinar panel. The webinar is being recorded and will be sent by email to all attendees. And after the webinar, please connect with USCAD and our expert panelists on LinkedIn, and that information will be available at the end. So today's agenda, we just went over the housekeeping items. We're going to go over a quick summary of USCAD, who we are, what we do. We're going to do a quick intro for our expert panelists. We're going to dive into Ken Simonson's presentation on the post-pandemic outlook. And after that, we're going to have an expert live panel discussion. And again, we'll move on to Q&A, but feel free to ask questions at any time, and we'll try to address them in real time. And lastly, we'll conclude the webinar panel with some next steps for all of you, for all the attendees. So USCAD is a full-service AEC technology consulting company, connecting companies with software, hardware, training, and consulting that they need to achieve their business goals. We offer a variety of services from BIM software implementation to training and consulting, staff augmentation, production services, as well as scan to BIM. We have strategic partnerships with some of the AEC's industry's most innovative solutions, Autodesk, Bluebeam, Leica, and M-Suite, to mention a few. And actually, as of recent, we are now the Autodesk Elite Partner. So just a little cookie on top that just got released last week. And we work with plenty of AEC firms across the nation. And we have numerous locations across the US with AE experts and all available at your local level. So with that, we're going to open up and introduce our speakers. So Ken Simonson is the Chief Economist at the Associated General Contractors of America. Ken has been chief economist for the AGC of America, for the leading trade organization for the construction industry since 2001. He provides insight into the economy and what it implies for construction and related industries through frequent media interviews, presentations, and the Data Digest, his weekly one-page e-newsletter that goes out to 50,000 subscribers. Probably more than that, but we're going to say 50,000 for now. Ken has been with the industry for more than 40 years of experience analyzing, advocating, and communicating about economic and tax issues. He currently serves as liaison to the Census Bureau's Construction Data Modernization Working Group. It's a bit of a mouthful. He is a fellow and past president of the National Association of Business Economics, and he's the co-director of the Tax Economics Forum, a professional meeting group he co-founded in 1982. Ken has a BA in economics from the University of Chicago and an MA in economics from Northwestern University. And with us as well is Katie Montag, who is the virtual design and construction director at Knutson Construction Services. As the VDC director, Katie seeks out ways to visualize virtual data and construction for all aspects of project management, contractor coordination, and visualization. Growing up in central Minnesota, she saw firsthand the skilled mason work of her grandfather. This interest in her craft drew her to complete a Master's of Architecture degree from North Dakota State University. And after holding traditional design positions, Katie transitioned away from an architect role and pursued her love of construction technology. Today, as a registered architect, she enjoys working alongside designers and owners to investigate and integrate new technology as a problem-solving tool through the project lifecycle. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Ken Simonson to start with some insightful construction data and trends impacted by the pandemic.
Great. Well, it's good to be with you, at least virtually. Let me give a little preview of where I'm headed with this. I want to show you what's been happening to construction employment, spending by category, and most important, what's going on with construction materials costs and supply chain issues. And I'll weave that together to give my expectations for where construction activity is headed in the next few months and perhaps on the longer term. This graph shows the change in construction employment from the pre-pandemic peak of February 2020, month by month. The blue line puts together 2 of the 5 construction sub-industries that the Bureau of Labor Statistics reports on in part of its monthly employment and unemployment report that comes out on the first Friday of each month. Residential building, meaning general contractors who do multifamily as well as single-family home builders, and then specialty trade contractors, whether they're working on new homes, additions, or renovations to existing homes. That's what makes up the blue line. The red line comprises non-residential general building contractors, specialty trade contractors, and heavy and civil engineering firms. And you can see that both of those series declined at the same steep rate as total non-farm payroll construction, shown by the green line, for the first 2 months after the pandemic hit in March and April. In May of last year, there was a huge rebound in construction as projects that had been halted either by government order or by the owner's choice reopened. Contractors applied for and made quick use of Paycheck Protection Program loans to bring back workers who had been furloughed, and would-be home buyers rushed out and started snapping up any homes that were on the market, and also to remodel or add to the homes they had. So for all those reasons, construction came back very strongly in May of last year. After that, though, the industry really diverged. The blue line continued a steady upward course until December. It had actually gotten back to the February 2020 level of employment, and it has stayed slightly above that level ever since. But the non-residential construction segment kept running into varying conditions, and indeed construction employment on the non-residential side declined last month, as it has a number of times before. At the state level, we can see huge variation from one state to another. In fact, just an hour ago, we got figures for state employment in May of this year. And I may need some help here. I thought that I was advancing this slide. There we go. All right. Because these numbers just came out a couple of hours ago, I haven't had a chance to update this map, but I can tell you that only 8 states had an increase from either April to May of this year or from February of 2020 to May of this year. And they're pretty much the greenest states shown on this map. Idaho, Utah, and South Dakota led the country in construction employment gains. And at the bottom, with declines of about 15% from February of last year to May of this year, Louisiana and Idaho, where so much activity in the economy depends on oil and gas, and in the case of Wyoming, of coal also, all of which have been down. Well, we also get data at the metro level, and this shows up for 358 metro areas, and most of them have also had a decline, but there's quite a different picture between where the biggest gains are, whether you look at percentage or numerical increase. So the black metro areas on the left side show the percentage in the 5 metros with the largest percentage increases from February of last year to April of this year. And they are widely scattered, different drivers for each of them. The red 5 or the bottom 5 metros, all related to oil and gas activity in Texas and nearby Louisiana. Looking at the right side, you get the numerical change, and again, widely scattered, different stories in each metro for why they've had a big gain in construction employment, but a heavy concentration in the biggest job losses. Well, switching from the employment picture to the construction spending picture, we get data from the Census Bureau on the first business day of each month with a lag of a month and a day. And they call their series Value Put in Place, which indicates that they're trying to measure the spending that took place in that month on projects underway. Some of you may be familiar with the data from Dodge Data and Analytics or Construct Connect. They're privately collecting information on project starts. and they aggregate all of that into all of the projects that started in the month. They take the total value of that project, and then it disappears the next month. So their series are a lot more jagged than the census numbers, but ultimately they should wind up in the same place. These census figures show a total spending was up 6% in the first 4 months of 2021 compared to the first 4 months of 2020. That sounds pretty good, but as soon as you peel back the layers of that onion, you see huge differences. Private residential spending, whether it was new single or multifamily or improvements, that's additions and renovations to owner-occupied housing, up by a whopping 22%. Private non-residential spending down a pretty steep 8%, and public spending, which had been holding up fairly well through 2020, has now turned negative. The rest of this table shows the various spending categories as defined by the Census Bureau, and they're listed in descending order of 2021 size. You can see that all of them are in the red, meaning the 2021 4-month totals were less than the year-to-date totals in 2020. But within those categories, there are some positives. For instance, in the second largest category, education, primary, secondary school construction up by a little bit. Now on the non-residential side, census does not break out renovations, improvements from new construction. And my guess is that most of what's happened so far on school construction has been upgrading HVAC systems, putting in physical barriers to stop the spread of COVID inside buildings, and building temporary classrooms outside of the main building. But going forward, as we see more housing taking place at the fringes of metro areas and in brand new subdivisions and smaller towns, we will get more new school construction to accommodate the school-age kids in those places. So this still looks like a strong category. Higher ed, on the other hand, was really hit hard by the loss of tuition revenue and student fees once they closed down campuses last spring, and very little revenue coming back in this year, including student athletic revenue in some schools. Now there's a big question about how many students will want to come back, how many should they allow back, how many of those full-paid foreign students are going to come back. So I think construction of new dorms, classrooms, and other buildings at universities is going to be subdued for quite some time. Another category that has a mix of positive and negative is commercial. Now, this is the term that gets used in a lot of different ways. For census, it means retail, warehouse, and farm construction. And not surprisingly, warehouse has been booming. That includes the so-called last mile or last hour distribution centers, so that you can order something in the morning and get it delivered the same day. It includes cold storage and the big fulfillment centers that are being put up at or close to airports. Retail, again, not surprising, has one of the steepest declines of any categories. Manufacturing, you can see also a mix of negatives and positives. These positives just recently showed up, and I think it's a sign that manufacturing is really coming back, and more of these categories, specifically the transportation equipment and electronics, they're going to be driven by, no pun intended, the demand for electric vehicles, and that is adding to both spending on automakers' plants, particularly new plants or plants that have been turned over to a new company, such as the Lordstown plant in Ohio, but also electronics plants and then other components such as batteries. One category that looks only slightly negative actually has a joker in the deck. That's office construction, down 3%. Census set up these categories decades ago, long before anybody had dreamed up the idea of a data center. I think of an office still as a place where only people work, not electrons, but nevertheless, data centers are hidden in here, and we can't pull them out to find out how much is really going on in terms of new office construction. These numbers are also boosted by the large amount of office renovation, remodeling, and even repurposing that's going on. But I think the new office construction is down substantially and will be for quite a while. At the bottom of this list is one thing that doesn't really belong here in terms of the strict order of size. It's a smaller category and getting smaller by the month. Lodging construction, I put it in just to show how steep a decline that has had. Well, let me move on to the biggest concern for contractors these days is materials costs and supply chain issues. This graph shows two producer price indexes that the Bureau of Labor Statistics puts out each month. The red line aggregates all of the materials and services that contractors are buying, whether they're buying directly from a producer or through a wholesaler or distributor. That would be counted on the services side. Both of those have gone up an unprecedented 24% over the last 12 months. And you can see that rate of increase has actually gotten steeper this spring. Meanwhile, the producer price index for new non-residential building construction, or I call it the bid price index, stayed completely flat last year, and it has only risen modestly, 2.8% over the 12-month period. So what this indicates is that contractors who signed a contract at a fixed price or guaranteed maximum price a year ago, they are really being hammered by the increase in materials costs that they aren't able to pass on. Even new contracts are showing only a very small fraction of the cost increases that are happening. And I think this relates back to the last slide where you saw every category was in the red. Non-residential contractors are shaving their bids in order to win any projects at all, even though it's very costly to them in terms of the materials costs. Well, the next slide shows some of the things that have gone up most dramatically. Again, these are producer prices, so they may differ from what a contractor is paying or what you might pay if you went to the local hardware or lumber or home improvement store. Lumber and plywood prices at that sawmill level more than doubled, up 111%. Steel mill products, 76%. Copper and mill shapes, brass mill shapes, 60%. Aluminum mill shapes, 29%, and so forth. So the wide range of materials and the extent of increases and the steepness of the increases in recent months are all unprecedented. But on top of that, contractors are experiencing ever-growing and more uncertain delivery times. I heard from one steel fabricator at the beginning of June that he had been told he couldn't get a bar joist until May of next year. And roofing contractors have said they've been told that roofing materials won't be available for 4 to 6 months. So you can imagine trying to start a building when you can't get the joists, or trying to cover it over when you can't get the roofing materials. And in addition, even when a producer says, all right, it's ready to ship, they may not be able to get a truck driver or a rail car to their site to bring it to the distributor or to the construction site. So huge difficulties that I think are weighing down the growth in construction activity. And we don't see much sign of relief coming soon. There's been a big drop in the last few weeks in the futures price for copper, even more so for lumber. But look at that purple line for lumber last fall. It hit a record high in September, dropped very substantially for 2 months, and then shot way past the previous record. So I don't take it for granted that we've passed this peak in terms of price increases. In fact, in terms of the difference between what contractors are paying and what their bid prices show, that gap can last for a very long time. This graph shows the periods when contractors were hemorrhaging profits because of that change in year-over-year change in the input cost, in this case goods, versus their bid price, in this case warehouses, was unfavorable to them. That lasted for more than 2 years, from late 2008 to the beginning of 2012, and I'm sorry, late 2009 to the beginning of 2012, and for about 2 years in 2017 and 2018. Well, let me mention that AGC has been working hard to get out the information about this. We've published 2 editions of what we call Construction Inflation Alert. It's an 8-page document that includes the 3 graphs I just showed you and text about specific materials that have been going up in cost, and also some suggestions for how to mitigate or at least communicate better about what's going on. We have a suite of documents called consensus docs that includes some model language if owners and contractors are interested in sharing the risk and the reward of price movements in either direction. We did a webinar a couple of months ago that's available, and I've been lobbying the administration to take the one action that they could to really bring prices down right away. The president, with the famous stroke of a pen, could get rid of the 25% tariff on steel and 10% on aluminum and allow the countries that adopted a quota instead of a tariff to end that. And similarly, he could get rid of the 9% tariff on Canadian softwood lumber, which has recently been recalculated that it should actually be an 18% tariff. So that would actually throw tinder on the fire of lumber prices. Unfortunately, we haven't made any headway yet, but AGC continues to work both on our own and with coalition partners to turn that around. Looking forward, we got new figures this morning out of the American Institute of Architects. Their Architecture Billings Index, which is calculated each month by asking a large panel of architecture firms, were your billings higher or lower than the month before. If that reading is over 50, it means more firms had an increase in billings than a decrease. Well, it went to 58.5, which was the highest reading since 2006. And sub-indexes for commercial, industrial, institutional, and multifamily residential construction all set levels that were the highest in 14 or 15 years, in one case in the entire 25-year history of that series. Dodge Momentum Index, which, and the ABI, the American Institute of Architects, says predicts construction activity, building construction activity, 9 to 12 months out. The Dodge Momentum Index, Dodge says, is a forecast of construction demand for commercial and institutional structures 12 months out. And you can see that's also had a huge rebound from the level of a year ago. And then for multifamily, I look at Census Bureau figures on the number of permits that builders have drawn. This isn't a fully reliable figure because sometimes for say a whole bunch of garden apartments, they may build a few and wait for the other buildings, or they may hold off on starting construction for a longer period. But normally this gives an indication of building activity a few months out, and this also is up very substantially. Well, I think that what we're looking at is a strong economic recovery right now and continuing unless we have a big setback from not enough people getting vaccinated, and unfortunately that seems to be stalling, and from a variant of the virus that manages to get around the defenses that vaccinated people have. But construction in any case is going to lag because so many owners, whether they're businesses that have planned to expand for their own account, institutions such as universities, developers and lenders, or state and local government agencies such as airport authorities, took big revenue losses, had unbudgeted expenses, and now a lot of uncertainty about when demand will come back and whether they really need that structure. The best private prospects for now are remodeling of any kind of building, local and cold storage, distribution centers, and a few big fulfillment centers. Data centers keep springing up in more and more places, and restaurants, even though many of them closed. I think people are as eager as ever to go back to eating out. I was in a restaurant for the first time this month and am glad to be doing that again. And so I think we will see construction of new restaurants and tenant improvements as new ones occupy vacated space. On the public side, K through 12 schools certainly strong. Water and sewer also seem to be holding up. As to whether we get more funding from the federal government, that's still very much in play, in doubt. But meanwhile, they've sent an unprecedented amount back to state and local agencies, not earmarked for construction generally, but it has enabled them to avoid cutting construction in order to balance their budget. And so that's a positive. For the longer term, I think we can discern some things that are already in place. Population growth slowed dramatically last decade. In fact, last year was the slowest population growth for a single year since the series began in 1900. And I'll show you how it looks state by state in a minute. That implies slower growth of demand for many types of structures, certainly single family homes, but also the infrastructure of roads and underground utilities that connects to them, the schools and libraries, police and fire and so forth that are associated with new developments, and slower growth of revenue for the local agencies. The shift from retail to e-commerce that started well before the pandemic certainly gathered speed, and I don't see that reversing. And then healthcare, more of that has moved out of hospitals, away from nursing homes, and that's going to continue evolving. And then on the energy side, a big shift driven partly by this administration, but by many states and by some private owners wanting to get more renewable energy, whether it's wind or solar, offshore wind. That also will require transmission lines in new places and massive battery storage. Then the shift to electric vehicles also has implications for the kinds of manufacturing that go on in this country and demand for vehicle charging stations. So lots of changes in the longer term, but with somewhat indefinite timetables. Well, let me close by showing a map of population change by state. This is not from the decennial census, but from estimates the Census Bureau puts out each December based on the death records, birth records, and information about both international and state-to-state migration. And it shows that from July of 2019 to July of 2020, population grew by barely 1/3%. 16 states, all those ones in deep red, had declining population, and that was the largest number to have a decline. And for the first time, not just in the 120-year history of the series, but probably since it became a state in 1850, California lost population, which helps explain the deep green color of the leading states. Idaho, with a 2.1% growth rate, was at the top of the league standings for the third time in 4 years, closely followed by Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and then by Texas and Washington and some states along the East Coast. I think these general trends are likely to continue. It's possible that this year's population growth will be even slower. Well, I'll leave it there, but invite folks to add their name to the Data Digest email list. Just send me an email at ken.simonson@agc.org. Be glad to send along these slides and also the newest edition of the Construction Inflation Alert, which we should have ready by the end of this week. So let me turn it back to you, Nick.
Yeah, thank you. Let me regain control. And there we go. Well, thank you so much, Ken. That was very, very awesome. I do read your Data Digest every Monday, but to hear it from you is a treat, and definitely helps better understand the current state of affairs. So with that, we're going to jump into our panel session with Ken and Katie. It looks like we did have a question come in. I'm trying to open the dialog box to make it visible. So the first question, we'll start there and then we'll get into our questions. What are some efforts to try to level off these spikes and drops? I know you went in, Ken, into a couple examples, and let me go away from presenter view, just go to panel view. It's audience view. Oh, where are we at? There we go. So what are some of the efforts to try and level off these spikes and drops? And I know you had a couple examples, but would you like to reiterate any of them?
Sure, and I assume this is referring to price spikes, not to spikes in demand for kinds of construction. First of all, dropping the tariffs, that 25% tariff on steel President Trump put in place, immediately domestic steel producers raised their prices to match, quite a natural response. And similarly, we think if those tariffs were ended, 25% on steel, 10% on aluminum, 9% and possibly going higher on Canadian lumber, taking those off would really help bring prices down right away. But there are also problems that are taking longer to solve that many businesses, certainly construction firms, but also manufacturers and goodness knows trucking companies are having trouble getting workers back, getting enough new workers to fulfill demand. So we really need to convince people that they should be vaccinated, that it should be safe to go back to work if they are. And also, we're seeing big changes in relative wages. So as manufacturers realize that they're being outcompeted for workers, they're going to have to start raising their wages. And this may be true for some construction firms and trucking companies also. And then finally, there are some one-off events like the giant freeze in Texas in February damaged all of the plants that produce the inputs for construction plastics, whether it's PVC pipe, vinyl siding, or vapor barriers, the resins that go into paints, that go into oriented strand board and other engineered wood products, and many other ways in which those plants have led to shortages and price spikes for construction materials. So hopefully some of those producers will harden their plants, provide more reliable backup energy or water sources and so forth, so we won't have a repeat of that event. But it does show how vulnerable the entire supply chain is to a lot of external unpredictable events.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect kind of turning point. And I know, Katie, high level as an architect by trade and now on the tech side, what's the biggest effect you've seen technology made on the field of design and construction that may help alleviate a lot of the issues that Ken has brought up today?
Yeah, so when I listen to Ken and talk about some of the different market challenges that we have, making sure that we're being open in communication, being really on key and on point with what that current market is, so that we can be more proactive rather than reactive to it. And technology, I think, plays into that significantly, giving us better tools to inform and to be able to look at designs very quickly and make decisions on that part. We highly focus on cloud-based platforms. So regardless of where you're at, whether I'm in the office or at home, or if it's a designer that we're working with, we have the same information to be able to start utilizing and referencing from that. And that even plays into how we want to limit what we call kind of redraw time. So if our market is constantly changing and is unstable to a degree that we have right now, we're really tuned into that, and we can look at that from the modeling standpoint and adjust based off that. So that technology just plays into our reaction time and making sure that we're efficient and collaborative in how we approach it, and giving us those tools to make those decisions based off of the current market and where we predict or where we see those materials and those suppliers coming from.
Yeah, and I mean, you hit it. The cloud is where everything will live eventually. I truly believe that. But I think that's the biggest impact, is that mutual working space, that no data silos, open communication. Have there been any negative effects that technology's created? Maybe, for example, maybe a shift in responsibilities, or mitigating risk in some way?
Technology has given us the tools and the power to be collaborative, but it also has really challenged us to understand where does one individual scope start or stop based off of the design and the construction side. So when you're working in a shared platform, making sure that we have alignment on what information is coming and what information is going based off of that. And I think there's a component of, liability and ensuring that we aren't reducing someone else's risk or increasing their risk based on how we share that information. And then we're all very aware now of cybersecurity. You go to a cloud-based platform and suddenly now you feel as though your data is available and online, and it could be compromised. And that's even working with an owner that's starting to ask about security policies as well. And so we're always making sure that when we do select software, anywhere from our estimating resources to our scheduling software, that it is secure platform as we go more cloud-based to make those decisions, so that we don't increase our risk from a company standpoint on a security side while we're trying to mitigate some of our estimating power, some of our cloud-based collaboration.
Yeah, no, and that's definitely a risk as you move to cloud, right? So you have to obviously partner with software providers that understand those risks. And I will shamelessly plug Autodesk right there. I truly believe that's one of the safest, most secure platforms for cloud-based anything. And I will shamelessly say that. Ken, as far as threats, I know we've brought up a couple. What do you think is the biggest threat to the industry? And what have you seen successfully done to negate those threats? I know you offered a couple, and I hope some people took some screenshots on available information, but if you could expand there.
Sure. I think there are multiple risks to construction. One is the state of the economy, and right now that is really going turbocharged, and I think we will see continued strong economic growth, which is necessary to bring construction back. It's typical that construction takes longer to get back in gear than the overall economy, but the sooner that the buildings that are now vacant get filled up, or that new needs emerge with new kinds of manufacturing and new consumer services, that's when you get more demand for construction. So I am optimistic that construction is close to the low point in terms of the spending happening now in non-residential activity. But if the economy does get a setback, for instance, from a new outbreak of the virus, then that's really going to delay the improvement in construction. Second, there are just any manner of unexpected events that may seemingly affect a narrow segment of the economy or of the geography that wind up having very widespread effects for construction. So the huge congestion that we've seen on the West Coast ports, that ripples all the way across the country in terms of delayed unloading of ships, delayed loading of the containers from the ports onto trains or trucks to bring them to distributors or local retailers. And even an isolated event like the shutdown of a bridge across the Mississippi River into Memphis, that has caused big delays in trucking. It briefly shut down barge traffic on the Mississippi that potentially included loads of cement and other construction materials. And again, the Mississippi-Missouri system, of course, serves a tremendous section of the country. So something as small as that nail for the horseshoe or the crack in the bridge, one particular bridge on the Mississippi, can have ripple effects that go very far.
Yeah, I mean, 2 points. One, so living here in Newport Beach, we've actually seen that overflow from Long Beach Port. That's a good 20 plus miles from us. And you've actually seen at times, I think it was counted plus or minus 55 different shipping containers that were just floating off the coast waiting to be unloaded. And it was kind of a sight to see. And then to your other point, with regards to federal spending on infrastructure, I read just as early this morning that there may be a bipartisan plan to agree on $1.2 billion in infrastructure. And I know specifically with regards to bridges and ways of transport, there's an aging infrastructure that definitely needs it. So hopefully both those points, that's going to be alleviated here. And what you said, ABI is predicting about 9 to 10 months, and then DDA or data analytics, about a 12-month lead lag as far as recovery. So I think I said that right.
Yeah, but both of them are certainly signaling very strongly, and the signals have gotten stronger over the last several months that we will see better news next year on non-residential building construction. And as you say, if we can get agreement finally on an infrastructure package, that will also be important to the non-building side as well as certain types of building construction.
Well, here's to hoping. I think it'll happen. Katie, this one came in for you. Well, I assume it's for Katie. It says LOD. Can suggesting critical eye on what needs to be high LOD versus what doesn't need as high LOD help in deliverable timeline and efficiency? So it sounds like, yeah, so what needs to be identified as high LOD to help with timeline and efficiency?
Yeah, so I'll just, for anyone who's on the call who maybe isn't familiar with that term, LOD is really a degree of how you're modeling or to what detail that you're putting into your, what we typically see as a 3D model application. And so as anyway, the more you model, the more detail, the more time consuming that can be to really be able to draw that out. So there is, I would say, a time and a place of when you do model to a very large degree. We certainly see it in facilities that require a lot of coordination, a lot of components to them that we need to ensure that we've got the right equipment in there. And then there's others that we don't provide as much detail and drawing into them. And that's really based off of the market or the scope of the work. So that's an opportunity to be more efficient. And I would even say along with not only the level of modeling, but how you give access to those individuals. When do you start to model? What information do you need to get that going to be able to determine how detailed you need to be on a particular project? I don't think the solution is to model the same LOD on every single project. And I also don't think that every job has the schedule to allow that to happen. And so when we're trying to achieve more efficiency, that is certainly a topic that we include as part of our BIM execution plan, is setting up those standards in place to be able to understand. I think a really good example of even LOD as far as it goes to this conversation is looking at how detailed we are in modeling, like bar joists. Ken mentioned those as far as an element or a component that has potentially an impact on the project. Being able to understand how much material is in that based off of the particular project and being able to quantify it would also then justify the reason why we might want to model a little bit more detailed, because it has a significant impact to cost and to schedule that maybe some other areas might not be as significant. So, with that, it's a conversation that needs to happen as part of the project of when and how we want to move forward to make sure that we're efficient with everyone's resources and times to deliver.
No, and that, I mean, absolutely makes sense. And you're getting popular. It seems like you got some more questions coming in specifically directed at you. From David, what kind of conversations are happening with owners about the costs and challenges of projects right now, including material, supply chain, and labor that impact facility cost and schedule? So what kind of conversations are happening with owners with regards to impacting facility cost and schedule?
Sure, I can certainly speak to the two questions that we primarily get from our owners right now in this market is one, material costs. What's the current trends? How do we feel about how we can even have access to the design? And the other one is actually based off of typically a workforce. We all know that there's been potentially not as many new coming into construction and filling that workforce. And then as projects ramp up, limited workforce to be able to fulfill those roles. So it's a question that our owners are asking. It would be hard for anyone to not see the news about the price of lumber right now. So that's the driving conversation of why a lot of the owners are asking that, because it's in everyday media that you don't have to be in the construction industry to be aware of that price increase. You just have to be, present in today's world to hear those impacts. And so our owners are probably even more sophisticated in material costs now than they were maybe a year ago, because they're hearing about the impacts to it on every facet of their life, from buying a car to a new building that they're having. There's some sort of material shortage. So that is a conversation that we present quite a bit. And that's, again, where our technology and our tools give us the right resources to make sure that we can price up different options based off of the different types of structures. So knowing that we go into it, we might have to be prepared to, swap out even as something as significant as the structural system in there based off the material cost. And our owners are more willing to have those discussions to understand that there's a market that might be driving what type of structure they have or a certain date that they want to get into their building so that they're not delayed on it as well.
Yeah, that's all. It's really that front end discussion and just honest communication can alleviate a lot of those issues where people aren't blindsided with the realities of what's going on. So, I mean, can't claim ignorance when it's on the news 24/7. So there is another one, and this is a little bit of a pivot back to Ken. So our tendency is to think growth is always good. If populations are leveling, construction would likely be flat for many years. How can the industry adapt?
The construction industry certainly depends on population growth in part, also on economic growth. And those two, while they're related, they're not synonymous. So we've certainly had periods of strong economic growth, even as population growth has moderated. And it's not just population growth or economic growth, but where it's happening. So if you have people moving from California to Idaho, it certainly adds tremendously to demand for houses, schools, and other facilities in Idaho, and we have seen that. As similarly, while the economy overall may not grow at a very rapid rate, as you see new industries evolve and new consumer tastes, those also require construction. And as people move around, that also adds to demand for new interstate highways, say, or for beefing up the transit system, the water supply and whatnot in different metro areas. So I'm not at all thinking that a further slowdown in population growth means the end of construction activity. That's not, even beyond that is the need for replacement and renovation of existing structures. So construction is going to be around for as long as any of us will be.
Agreed. And we picked the right industry. Back to Katie. How is technology lowering building costs and long-term facility operations? And by building, the clarification was for the facility itself, not the building process. So early on in design, what are we doing? How is technology being leveraged to lower costs and long-term facility operations?
At Knutson, we do a significant amount of healthcare work. So there's healthcare, how it's being delivered is changing. And so that impacts how that design process is happening. And so the technology that we're seeing is actually being able to look at how do you provide flexibility, how do you provide a design based off of long-term uses of those without actually knowing where that market is going to go and what that deliverable model is going to look like within healthcare. And so that technology that we see is providing solutions or potential use case scenarios of how we could design a building on the forefront for a long-term operations side. So it's not necessarily, I would say, direct, as far as that use case, a direct cost to facility savings as much as it is when the time comes for a building to either be repurposed or redesigned based off of a change in how care is delivered specific to healthcare. There has been that potential at the beginning of the project through the use of technology to consider those designs very quickly and very fluidly on how that model is being provided. And then along with that, the other component that we see a lot of the technology is through what we call reality capture. So throughout the duration of the project, we are either scanning, you can think about it, laser scanners, drones, or 360 cameras, and being able to actually document the facility as it's being built so that at the end of the job, when you turn the project over to the owner and to the facilities team on that project, they now actually have technology in their hands to use in the future to be able to plan out. So let's just say that an air handling unit goes down. They actually have the information, the scan, the exact location, how it's hooked up. It can be tied directly to the building and the plans itself so that the ability to operate as an owner is less of scrambling to find where that information is and having it at your fingertips and available, because we plan for that during the construction process as well.
Yeah, I can say from my past industry days, tracking down ductwork to figure out what was feeding what, especially specifically in healthcare, was always not always the easiest, especially popping tiles in California is not those ISO boxes are not fun to be in. They're sweat boxes, really. So yeah, having an actual scan to BIM and not working off of quote unquote as-built, but actual real life install, a huge plus one for any maintenance group. I think they'd have a tough time arguing against you on that one.
I would just add on to that too quick, Nick. I would certainly say, since you brought up, scanning ceiling tiles, I think that's the area that the technology is going towards, is that it's technology that even if you didn't have it when your facility was built 10, 15 years ago, there's other ways to integrate technology into a current facility so that you now have it for the next 10 to 15 years. And that is a scanning, typically it's a scanning process or some sort of modeling that can then be leveraged for facilities going forward.
Yeah, I know I shamelessly plugged Leica earlier. We actually, that's a big thing we're doing right now. It's a big ask with a lot of clients that we're proposing to is scanning existing facilities for future maintenance programs, and not just new construction, and not even stuff that they're necessarily rebuilding or doing TI work in. They just want to have the data available to them. So that's been a big push we've seen from healthcare clients. Let's see, so we got some questions in the chat, and I think they actually tie back to some questions that we've been working on. So with regards to the construction wage and industry, this one's for Ken. Our construction wages / industry appeal, is there appeal drawing our share of qualified workers, or do we need to make changes to make labor competitive? And what I want to tie that in with, Ken, is a deep dive between the relationship between available job openings and the high unemployment rate. And if you can expand there, and maybe with regards to, is it all about the unemployment benefits, or is there something else that we're not seeing?
Well, I certainly hear often from construction business executives and others that the extended unemployment benefits are keeping people from coming back to work. And that might be true in low wage jobs such as fast food or hospitality or driving, but I think it's not a very compelling explanation for construction, where the median wage has always been well above the median in other industries, and the starting wage certainly for people of a given experience level is well above. So I think it's more having to do with people having lingering symptoms from COVID themselves, having to take care of a family member who is either sick or not able to go to daycare, and maybe concerns about the job site that they would be going to. But certainly we'll see over the next few months. It's already happened in quite a few states and is scheduled to happen in the next couple of weeks in many more states, that those additional unemployment benefits will expire. And then you also have the question of, are the people who are still unemployed, do they have the skills that are needed for the jobs that are open right now? And there's always that challenge for construction, that it's not something that they can necessarily hire people who want to transfer from another industry without training. You generally need to have varying degrees of training to qualify for construction jobs. But on that first point of pay, that is one that concerns me. While the median wage in construction has historically stayed well above the median for all industries, the gap has narrowed in the last couple of years. And there was a story about this today in the Wall Street Journal, not on construction, but manufacturing also has traditionally paid quite a premium. But as fast food chains or warehouses and delivery companies have boosted their wages, sometimes dramatically, from minimum wage to $15 an hour, and paying large retention bonuses, that has meant that construction firms that might have attracted people at an entry level because the wages were so much higher, now they're not as competitive when people weigh, do I really want to work outside in 115-degree heat in Phoenix from dawn to sundown, or be indoors and maybe take a little pay cut, but still be better off. So I think we will have to see in the next few months if construction firms start raising their pay at a higher rate in order to reestablish that premium.
That's a great point. And that 115-degree heat does not sound desirable if you can, it's that work-life balance and it's just the quality of life. So construction, yeah, definitely has to answer the bell, and we'll see how they go about doing it here in the months to come. Katie, so we have a few minutes left. I do want to ask this final question, and then I will do my wrap up very quickly, but I'd rather them listen to you than me. So how do we engage a younger workforce, and where does tech get involved?
Sure. I'll go back to a little bit of that workforce conversation. There's certainly a component of an older generation that is now leaving construction as far as, a lot of the skilled trades go. And how do we train and really encourage individuals to go into those skills trades? And I think that's where technology can actually make it more attractive, right? It's also an opportunity to be able to leverage and actually harness all of the information and the experience that an older generation has, and being able to capture that so that a younger generation can have that coming in. We find very often that with technology, it can kind of be the attraction point of getting people into construction. There's no doubt that it can be some bright, shiny object that someone will see and can see the power of it, but then you have to turn it into the application and how it's being used. And so sometimes the first step is to be able to use the technology to show that there's maybe a different way of doing things. In the past, I always look at it, we could pull a dimension with a tape measure. Now we can laser scan and we can get millions of dimensions from one scan. And so it doesn't mean that the tape measure is not usable and not worthless, but there's a lot of ways that we can start to be using that technology to attract to maybe a younger generation that isn't familiar with that power of the technology that's out there, and then give them that resource and tool, and then educating them on different opportunities and careers within construction that maybe didn't even exist in the past. An example is VDC. That's a relatively new career opportunity within construction, and being able to show that there are careers that are focused around technology within construction, or even in the field, that there are the uses of total stations and layout equipment that is leveraging maybe what a younger generation is familiar with, some mobile technology, and then bringing it to the application of in the field use as well.
And I think that falls on all of us to identify the younger generation and then introduce them and educate them on what it is that this career path could really mean, and the available options to them. I know that we painted a little bit of a bleak picture of current state, but Ken definitely provided what is future state and what we should look forward to. And Katie and Ken, thank you both. I'm gonna go ahead and share the wrap up screen here if I can be good at technology today. Let's see, we are audience view. Perfect. So here are the next steps. So if you found this presentation valuable today, and I hope that you all did, I certainly did, and I was, I'm on it, so I'm biased. And if you're interested in learning how your construction firm can be more competitive, I'd like to invite you to partake in a discovery process with USCAD. It is complimentary. It's a 4-step process to help you achieve, some desirable business outcomes, increase efficiencies, and optimize revenue. Also, be on the lookout. You can see in the bottom right corner, we're having the next construction webinar in July about owner and operators and the use of the ACC, or the Autodesk Construction Cloud, to increase profit and reduce risks. Email invites will be sent out soon, and you can check on our website to register as well. And we did it right at noon, so noon my time. That concludes our webinar. Thank you again to our panelists, Ken and Katie. I really appreciate your guys' time, and everyone on the call, thank you for joining us and being active in the chat. And I wish you all the best the rest of your day and the best in the future. Thank you, Ken, and thank you, Katie.
Thank you.